so I chose New York, and lo and behold, one of the first films, you come across film and television shoots now, more so television shoots in New York now, but film shoots all the time on the streets of Manhattan. The first one I came across just happened to feature one of my heroes growing up as a kid. It was Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese shooting a scene from The King of Comedy.
Welcome today. I have actor Jordan Lage with me today, and I'm very excited. He got a lot of very interesting roles under his belt, and he's going to give us some information about New York City and some movies and other stuff that are filmed there. Welcome, Jordan.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, let's just jump right in. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started or called to acting?
Yeah, sure. So
your career?
I was born in Northern California. I was born in Palo Alto, and as a result of a divorce when I was very young, I wound up moving with my mom to the East Coast, but I would also split time with my old man. Once I got to about the age of 8, he had relocated from Palo Alto to Berkeley, California. So I spent my summers in the Bay Area and school year in southeastern Pennsylvania. Consequently, I was raised by my mom, her sister, and their mother, my grandmother.
Okay.
And they began at a very early age taking me to film and theater. I think the first film I can recall seeing in a movie theater, which in Westchester, Pennsylvania, just happened to be one of those grand and glorious old Warner Brothers Art Deco palaces called the Warner. The first film I remember seeing was Disney's Jungle Book. And, like any 6-year-old, I was quite enraptured with it. And then my aunt used to be a member of a doily cart company. That's a group of people that are devoted to doing the works of Gilbert and Sullivan.
Okay.
So my aunt was a singer, and she was also a voice teacher at Westchester State College in Westchester, PA. My mom had been a musical theater performer in college at Allegheny College. It's where she met my father. And so their love of the performing arts was instilled in me by, taking me along with them to see these things. Right. And of course, I caught the bug very early on.
I don't see how you could have gone any other way with that background.
Right. And a few years after that, when I was about 8 years old, my mom remarried. We moved to the suburbs of Wilmington, Delaware. Now, I'm not sure if if your youth was spent in suburbia, or if you're a product of the suburbs, but mine was pretty dull, I gotta say. The development I grew up in, it was a development, that were going up all around the country, I guess from the mid 60s on. And I'm just going to kind of lay this on you to set the framework for what happened to me a bit later. So this development, it wasn't cookie cutter houses. They were all different architectural styles and everything, very nice. But in a development of maybe 150 homes, of which there were only 2 entrances to this suburban development. So there were no businesses in here, just family homes. There were no sidewalks. There were no playground.
Okay.
So the kids, I'm not quite sure whoever dreamt up this idea for this particular development, but there was nowhere for the kids to play. And to find like a ball field to play or a large kind of grassy field, the closest of which was my elementary school, you had to walk about half a mile and kind of make your own, make your own play area. It was just kind of a grassy field. So it was soccer and it was football and all that sort of thing. My point is that growing up in suburbia, in this particular suburban development, left a lot to be desired for the children. It was great if you were, I guess, just the owner of the house, like my stepfather was. But there was no consideration given to the kids and keeping them entertained and keeping them sort of inspired and active. So this is my theory about why I got so attracted to film and theater. It was just kind of a place where I could go to re-energize my batteries, and to make my life a little bit more exciting, rather than just kind of living in a sort of an island of suburbia.
Kind of a sterile environment almost.
Very. And the bug that I caught, it was a couple. It was maybe actually probably the same year I saw Jungle Book. My aunt took me to see the film Carol Reed's Oliver.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably 1969 when she took me to see that. And it looked like those kids, Mark Lester and Jack Wilde, who played the Artful Dodger, were having so much fun that I thought, God, I would love to do that. That looks like great fun. Even at that young an age, I was probably about 6 years old, appreciating that they had filmed it on, in sound stages and backlots and stuff in London or outside of London. But it made me think, oh, wow, I would love to do that for a living. And then, get a little bit older and you start discovering sports. Like for me, it was baseball and football and soccer and everything. And then I didn't really kind of catch the acting bug or the film bug again until about 4 years later, when my older brothers took me one Saturday night to go see the Poseidon Adventure.
Okay.
And this was, I have to say, John, this was so groundbreaking for me, because it was at that impressionable age, which I kind of put in like, the seminal years from like 8 years old to maybe 16, 17, 18 years old, when the things that you're exposed to really have that effect on you that is going to take you, I think, on through your adult years.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
You can't underestimate what that movie was like to a 10-year-old. First of all, it was so engrossing watching these few people that survived the overturning of the SS Poseidon try to find their way to safety. It just had the adrenaline pumping in me. It was an unbelievable. I can't you can't underestimate what an effect it had on me. And I was so thrilled by it, John, that I went back and I saw it 9 more times.
Wow.
Over successive Saturday matinees. And for whatever that was, the next 2 or 3 months. I mean, it played forever at this one theater in the suburbs of Wilmington, Delaware, like movies used to do. You will remember, we're probably about the same age.
Yeah.
But back in the days before the VCR and, all before that, movies would play for months on end in local theaters. Yeah.
I remember that's a time when all the rest of the disaster films came out, the Towering Inferno and all that.
Oh, yeah.
Airport or Airplane.
Airport, yeah. Well, the Towering Inferno just upped the ante. I mean, that was even better than the Poseidon Adventure. And I went back and saw that multiple times. I was a 12-year-old or whatever, 11-year-old when that came out.
Yeah.
So that's how it all started. Yeah.
I was saying, I remember Midway with the sense around that would vibrate in. That was all part of it.
Too.
Oh, yeah. Forgot that one.
Another exciting one for a kid, Not a great movie by any stretch, but
fun entertainment.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. A nice way to, to spend $1 and, kill a couple of hours in a movie theater back then.
Mm-hmm.
So that really instilled, believe it or not, that it was that one movie that it began to instill this love of movie going for me. And my mother, I was the baby of the family. I have 4 brothers. My mother indulged me by taking me to like a new release every weekend. And when she didn't want to accompany me, she would drop me off at the movie. And, that just kind of happened to coincide. This was 1973, I guess, with kind of the golden age, the second golden age, I guess, of American cinema. If you consider the 40s, 30s, 40s, the first golden age.
Right.
And so, I grew up a product of 1970s American cinema. And, I remember going to see, I begged my mom to take me to see The Godfather Part 2 when it opened in late 1974. I was 11 years old. And I was like, you got to take me to see this. And she did. And so we had very, very many fond memories of her taking me to R-rated movies back before I was able to officially supposed to be going to these things. But it was great fun and it was thrilling. And then I'm going to add on to that. When I would go see my father in the summertime, that's where I discovered the joy of getting a film education by going to the revival houses in the Bay Area. There were many in San Francisco. There were quite a few in Berkeley itself. There were some in Oakland, California too. And I would spend my summer afternoons in darkened movie theaters getting a film education. And these are curated by, I mean, you know what Berkeley's like. And Berkeley's it's a university town. It's very intellectual, very liberal. So the people that curated these programs for these revival houses really knew what they were doing, you know. And that was my first exposure, for example, to Fellini, my first exposure to Alain Resnais, Hiroshima Mon Amour, last year at Marienbad, believe it or not. The first couple of Fellini films I saw were 8.5 and Roma on a double feature. I had, if we fast forward to like 1977, I had missed Taxi Driver when it had come out the year before, and maybe it was just a little bit much for my mother to take me to a movie like that. But a year later, I was 14, and I decided to go see it at a revival house, and it was on a double bill with a movie I'd never even heard of before called Mean Streets. So I went for Taxi Driver, was really impressed by it, but I came away being blown away by Mean Streets. And that's probably a good segue into me going, I have to see more of New York. Because of where I grew up in those northern Delaware suburbs, cities like San Francisco, which I spent a lot of time just as a kid wandering about and sort of drinking that energetic hustle and bustle vibe in to sort of stimulate myself, then graduated on to New York City that I had grown up learning about by going to the movie. And I'll make this long story even shorter. When I got to high school, even I started in junior high, I began performing in the school plays, and then I began doing community theater, a lot of community theater in Wilmington, Delaware. And I decided I wanted to be an actor. And so I chose to go to New York University for my undergrad degree in drama, study acting there. And New York sort of became my oyster. You know, that was 43 years ago.
You can't find it there. You can't find it anywhere, right?
That's true. I thought about applying to, USC, maybe going to film school out there, but I really wanted to learn the craft of acting. And I thought, what better place to do that than to go to where theater is done, really. Theater's really just done in New York. It's certainly not really done in LA.
All right.
So I chose New York. And lo and behold, one of the first films, you come across film and television shoots now, more so television shoots in New York now, but film shoots all the time on the streets of Manhattan. The first one I came across just happened to feature one of my heroes growing up as a kid. It was Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese shooting a scene from The King of Comedy. In Times Square. And I could not believe my luck, because here this is summer of 1980. I was actually going to school in Manhattan at an acting school called the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And I was wandering around the city, just, taking it all in. And here were two of my idols, who I'd been growing up, spending my summers in revival houses, seeing their movies like Mean Streets and Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and all that kind of thing. And they were here. There they were filming a movie, and I was thrilled beyond belief.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's what did it for me. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'll go ahead.
No, that's how we get to talking about New York on film.
Okay.
Yeah, I've always thought of New York City really as sort of Hollywood East.
Yeah, well, and when you said in your email that New York City is a character, I'm like, oh, that's it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because I knew what you meant, and I hadn't processed, I hadn't thought of it. I thought that's a great idea. But I want to start you out with a little light question. I was looking at you on IMDb, and I see you've been on Law and Order Special Victims Unit and the other two, regular Law and Order, and
Right.
what's the other one?
The Criminal Intent was
Criminal
one,
Intent.
and the
Yeah.
other was Special Victims Unit. Yeah.
If you could tell me a little bit about that in a minute, but I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had the role where you're being interviewed by the two policemen about a homicide and you continue to do your work or you move your boxes?
Yeah, I'm sure I have. But that's just typical of the Law and Order formula.
Yeah.
It's the police procedural
Right.
that has its antecedents and tried and true. In fact, I was in order to prepare for this interview, we were talking about film noir,
Hmm.
and I decided to go back and rewatch probably one of the first classic procedurals films that was ever made. It's Jules Dassin's The Naked City,
Naked City. Yes.
which was all filmed in New York. And if your listeners have not seen it and have an affinity for movies that are set and filmed on location in New York, that is the granddaddy of them all.
It sure is.
They're up, this came out in 1948. And up until that point, many films set in New York in the 30s and 40s, even in the silent era. Many films use New York as a location, but not a lot of them were filmed entirely in New York, unless you go back to the very beginning of the industry.
Back to the Edison days.
Yeah, back to the Edison days, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the early silence. But so The Naked City was one of the first to be shot entirely in New York. And it was just kind of wonderful seeing how Jules Dassin made use of the locations. And, having lived in New York now for more than 4 decades, it's always fascinating to me to see a time capsule like that captured of neighborhoods that I'm familiar with now or have been familiar with since 1980, and how different they are.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, earlier today, I went for a run, and I live on the east side of Manhattan, Lower East Side of Manhattan. So I'm just a half a mile from where a lot of the climax of The Naked City was filmed at Lower East Side, down on Orchard Street, where most immigrants who first came to New York around the turn of the century settled.
Okay.
So the end of that movie is filmed down there, and the climax is actually filmed on the Williamsburg Bridge. It doesn't look anything like it did in 1948.
Yes.
There are some remnants, but it's actually kind of like, I go on these walks around the city and I see where some of my favorite, I live within a half a mile to a mile of where almost all of my favorite films were shot. Movies like Taxi Driver and Mean Streets and The Three Godfathers, Crossing Delancey. The list goes on and on and on. But I walk by these shooting locations that were used by Scorsese and Coppola, and Joan Micklin Silver, for example, all filmed. And, I remember them from the film, and I kind of get a little, I get very nostalgic about it. Unfortunately, some of the neighborhoods, just because of time and the way a city evolves, loses that special appeal that it once had, that made it so photogenic, especially in a movie like The Naked City. But anyway, it's a great fun film. Great for the acting. Barry Fitzgerald, who was a great character actor back in the late 30s and 40s. He's the lead in this. He plays the detective that's tasked with solving a murder that happens at the beginning of the film, and it's a great example of a police procedural, of which the Law and Order series went on to
take over.
Exploit, if you will.
Yeah, because when you were talking back about early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, that's really the neo-noir has really taken over all those film noirs that we've seen back in the past. We're getting
Yeah.
Bullet and Chinatown and
Yeah.
'74 is going on. It was a great time, and of course I learned it backwards. I watched all the '74 stuff and
Yeah.
on, and then I'm like, there's an original noir film back here, so I did it
Yeah.
backwards. But yeah, I can see that's the one. She has a tattoo, right? And he's trying to track down the tattoo on the murdered girl's foot. Is that the same
You're talking about
movie?
the Naked City?
Naked City, yes.
No,
I think
that
it's
the young woman is she's strangled to death at the beginning, and just like in Law and Order,
Yeah.
there are all these red herrings that are kind of thrown at you
putting it back out.
to begin with, and then you think, oh, it's this guy, oh, it's that guy,
Yeah,
and then it turns out to being kind of the most unlikely of suspects. But
I'm going to
yeah,
go back and watch that again soon. There's another early procedural that's set in Boston called, I think it's Mystery Street, and Ricardo Montalban is the thing, and he's going through the same, the procedure.
right,
And Eddie Muller from Film Noir,
yeah.
he was crediting that one as being the first. They're the father of all procedurals.
Oh,
And I
is that
think
right? Okay.
you're more accurate with the Naked City.
Well, I don't know. I don't know Mystery Street, so I'm not sure when that came out.
It came out in '50. It
Oh,
was
50.
after.
Okay. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Naked City was 48.
Uh,
And then there are others too, as I've been sort of exploring that genre, which I believe me, Eddie Muller seems to be the reigning sort of
right.
expert on
Right.
film noir. I certainly am not. I mean, it's a genre that I'm familiar with, but I don't make it my life's work to study them. But recently I've been catching up on quite a few of them. But there's a couple that I saw this past week that predate the Naked City by almost a decade. One is Confessions of a Nazi Spy,
Okay.
which starred Edward G. Robinson.
Edward G. Robbins. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually based on a true story. I guess the FBI was looking into Nazi sympathizers in America, of
Mhm.
which there was I guess a considerable contingent of back in the
Right.
late 30s.
I think we
And
could have gone either way at that time.
yeah, I
As a
mean,
country.
one of America's greatest heroes at that time, this is a decade removed from his transatlantic flight, was Charles Lindbergh.
Charles
Right.
Lindbergh and
And he was a Nazi sympathizer who apparently had sort of fascistic leanings.
Henry Ford too.
Ford, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that there's that one, and then the House on 92nd Street, which is I believe was a 1941 film, I believe. Anatole Litvak was the director, and again, it's another sort of procedural, FBI procedural, where they're trying to uncover a Nazi spy ring.
Right.
That
I was.
Yeah.
It's not Lloyd Bridges, but Floyd Nolan, maybe.
Lloyd Nolan is in that. Yeah.
Yeah, Floyd
Right.
Nolan. I'm about 3/4 of the way through that one. I was just watching
okay.
it last week. Yeah,
All right.
and there's the worst one they made is Big Jim McLean. It's
Remember
John Wayne
yeah.
is a communist hunter.
I'd forgotten what that was about.
Yeah.
I went on a whole John Wayne jag during the pandemic, and my wife gave me for Christmas, one Christmas a few years back, this enormous Scott Eyman biography of Wayne.
Okay.
And it's like reading a phone book. It is very, very detailed. And I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna look at the entire canon of Wayne films, which was kind of a fool's mission because he made something like 185 movies.
About 80 of them are the same movie.
Yeah, basically, right. So, and half of them are also the Republic B westerns that he made in the 1930s. But I saw a fair share of John Wayne movies, and it was quite opening. It gave me quite eye-opening. It gave me a real appreciation for his dedication to his work ethic and to his business ethic, although he came close to bankruptcy many times, I think, throughout his career. But it's fascinating.
I started that same kind of process, and I tried to go back and started watching these old John Waynes. And there was one where they were calling the federales rallies, like they didn't even know how to pronounce the word in the movie. And they were, the rallies are coming.
Yeah. Well, the thing about seeing a lot of movies like that, sort of back to back to back in a short span of time, because Wayne worked with John Ford so many times. I have to say, I admire a lot of things about John Ford's pictures, but I can't get. I having seen so many of them, I can't get fully on the John Ford bandwagon because so many of the tropes that he uses, particularly in the westerns, he used over and over again, and
Right.
I just found them really tiresome. There was the obligatory sort of male brawl in a bar that was intended to be sort of comic relief. It's there. It's there in almost every film.
A woman that
You
he
know,
loved, but he just couldn't live with her.
exactly. And he also has to wind up like taking her over his knee and spanking her.
Yes.
And it's just like, come on, man.
my
Uh,
my
yeah,
world famous short summary of McClintock was two women go west and find abusive husbands.
exactly. That's it. And God bless Maureen O'Hara. She endured it, I suppose. But
Yes.
I find going to the movies, I find watching movies just a never-ending font of fascination and inspiration. I just love it. I've never kind of tired of it. My
Yeah. Oh,
tastes have changed, but I've never tired of it. Yeah.
just you were talking about how you grew up in kind of suburbia. I grew up in, as you can tell from the voice, way in the country. We had to pipe sunshine in. But both my parents worked back in a time when most mothers didn't,
Okay.
and so I was always getting dropped off at like double features, Robinson Crusoe on Mars and stuff
Right.
like that, and
Right.
spending all day. And it's like it opened the whole world. Like there's more out there to go find than
Yeah.
just to stay here and
So
to
did you
this
grow up?
town.
Did you grow up in the Panhandle?
No, I was over in Mississippi.
Oh wow.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, that's where I'm from originally.
Wow.
And
All
so
right.
yeah, way out in the country. So there was always something to get into. But even when I was even when I was an adult in the army, go to the movie by myself. You
Mhm.
know, middle
Mhm.
of Saturday afternoon, Saturday night, it didn't matter. I
Yeah.
didn't need anybody else to go in there and just go to that place.
Now
So
you mentioned that you had just gotten back from France.
yes,
Tell
yes.
me where you went, because I mentioned you in an email. I'm a big Francophile.
Well, you did say that, and I didn't respond, but it's because my French is so atrocious. I didn't want to say anything. But we went to Paris and we stayed there for 6 or 7 days, and we had my wife had our schedule packed. We went to the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, the Louvre, the
Mhm.
Orsay, uh, Notre Dame, but it's still, got construction going
Yeah.
on around it.
Yeah.
And the Opera House in Paris, which was
Mhm.
really surprising. She drugged me there. I didn't think I'd like it, and it was really enjoyable.
Oh, it's
Go
beautiful.
and
Yeah.
see them. Yeah. And so we did that, and of course, I'm a photo bug, and so I've taken pictures of bridges and flying buttresses and everything I could get. And then we drove out to Caen because
Yeah.
I wanted to see William the Conqueror's castle.
Okay.
We did that castle. We went to Normandy,
Yep.
and then the third day out there, we went to Mont Saint Michel,
Right.
which is and then back to Paris and flew out. So that was our
Right.
trip.
That's a fantastic trip.
We were running the whole time, but it was
Yeah.
worth it. Yeah,
Oh,
really
thank God. Had you been
love the
there
French people.
before?
No, that's my first time.
Oh, okay.
I'd been in Germany. I'd passed through France one time, but you hear all these horror stories, and everybody was nice,
Mhm.
friendly. I'd
Yeah.
try a couple of words in French, and they'd go right into English for me. And
Right.
we had a great time, well
That's been
treated.
Yeah. That's been my
Yeah,
experience too. I mean, we can
yeah.
sort of segue into France and French cinema if you want to. I don't know if you're if
No,
you're up on your French films or not. But,
no, I'm not. I
oh,
just
okay.
to build my gallows high, which is the one with the
Elevator to the Gallows.
elevator to the gallows. Yes, that's the
Yeah.
one. I was.
Louis Malle, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean
yeah,
that has its roots in film noir as well.
right.
Certainly,
Jean
Jean
Moreau.
Moreau. Jean
Jean
Moreau.
Moreau.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. One
she's
of her first
amazing.
films. Yeah, she's great.
And I first ran into her when I was watching The Train with Burt Lancaster.
Yep.
We're stopping the Nazi, and that's what I did. I also everywhere I went, I recorded a little video and talked about some movies.
Oh,
Oh
fantastic.
yeah, here we're at the Orsay Museum, and these is the artworks that Nazis tried to steal. And if you see the
Right,
train and the
right.
monuments been and all like
Yeah.
that, I'm slowly putting those out on
Well,
YouTube.
the Orsay was used before they turned it into a train station. I'm sorry, before they turned it from a train station into a museum, it was used as a location in a Bertolucci film called The Conformist
Oh, okay.
with Jean-Louis Trintignant. If you're interested in seeing what it looked like before it was a museum.
Always.
But
Yeah, train station.
yeah.
And I'll tell you, no, go back on one more thing.
Yeah.
I was just amazed at the Toulouse-Lautrec's. I didn't think that would be what drew my attention out of that whole museum.
Okay.
And of course, there's that great movie with Jose Ferrer. Jose Ferrer.
Yeah.
On it. So definitely want to go back.
Oh, for sure. France was the first place I visited outside of the United States.
Okay.
When I was in college, I had a girlfriend who was doing a European tour, a bus and truck tour of West Side Story.
Nice.
And on my Easter break, she just happened to be in the south of France. I said, "So where are you?" She says, "Oh, I'm in the south of France, area called Provence. We're going to be down here for a few weeks." I said, "Well, I don't know it. I don't know anything about it, but I'd love to come see you, of course. And so I'll, book a flight to the south of France." And awesome. I did. And of course, I instantly fell in love with it. It's like, John, it's one of the garden spots of the world. It is so beautiful. And so that began a lifelong affair for me with France and French culture and the language and everything like that. But I was in Paris last summer for a few weeks. And I'm a big Truffaut fan, in particular, his first feature film, which was The 400 Blows. And it's a coming of age tale of a young boy, probably 13 years old, going to a public lycée. That's a fancy French word for school. And he can't seem to keep from getting into trouble.
Okay.
And in the end, he's expelled from the school, and his parents enroll him in a reformatory. And he gets his first taste of adulthood through the course of the film. Uh-huh. But it's a beautiful movie. It's very, very emotional, very moving, and it's kind of one of my touchstones. And it was all shot in Paris until the story moves outside of Paris, getting over towards the coast where Le Havre is, where the reformatory is. So, but most of it is shot on the streets of Paris. Maybe some of it was handheld, but probably they were still using dollies. The photographer on the film was a very famous French cinematographer his name was Henri Decaille. Just an excellent French New Wave DP, and of course, Truffaut himself was sort of at the vanguard of the French New Wave as well. But so when I'm there in Paris on my own last summer, and I decided. I was there for a couple of weeks. I decided, well, I'm going to try and visit as many locations in the film of the 400 Blows as I could possibly visit, and just see how it's changed, and put together this little montage that I have yet to post on Instagram of stills from the movie and stills from what it looked like. What was last year? So it was 2022. So like 63 years later.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun.
Sounds like I'm waiting for your book to come out on movie locations in New York and Paris.
I don't know if you're like you. It sounds like you're like me. You go on a vacation to a place, and you start going, "Oh yeah, they filmed one of my favorite. I'm going to make the pilgrimage to ba 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 ba."
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, here in New York, I can do it every day as I just step out of my apartment. But I was in Sicily about 12 years ago, and of course, I had to go see where the Godfather films were filmed in Sicily, and I wound up doing that. I wound up meeting a guy who ran there's a little town called Savoca. It's on the eastern coast of Sicily, and if you remember the first Godfather film, it's the village where Al Pacino and his bodyguards wind up sitting down, having a drink, and they talk to the cafe owner about, we saw this pretty young woman in the countryside, and my friend here has fallen in love with her. Do you know who she might be? And the guy realizes they're talking about his daughter.
Yeah.
Right. And so he goes back in, he starts yelling, hear him yelling, and the bodyguards get nervous with Pacino there and all that. And then the owner comes out with his two sons kind of flanking him. And Pacino says, well, hey, what would you think if I married your daughter?
Yeah, right.
Essentially, right? So I go to this town, John, and I'm wandering around. The bar is still there. If you walk into the bar, it's like a shrine to the Godfather.
Okay.
There are pictures, stills from the Sicily shoot all over the place. The church where Pacino marries the young Sicilian girl is just up
Mhm.
the hill. You can go visit that. And I go into this little, very quiet little town, right? But I go into this little souvenir shop right next to the bar, and there's a woman in there, and all around are, Il Padrino T-shirts, coffee mugs with Brando's face on it. You can buy a set of movie stills from the guy, all the stuff that you can
Everything.
imagine. So I said to the woman, I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, would you mind?" In whatever Italian I could muster, I said, "Would you mind if I take a picture of you here in your shop?" And she's like, I said, "I just want to take a picture." Just aspetta, wait a moment, let me get my husband. I said, no, you don't have to get your I need your husband. I just want to take a picture of you in your shop. She says, no, wait, he's right next door. So she goes out of the shop, goes literally next door to their house, comes back with her husband, and the husband says to me in English, he says, I understand you are asking about the film, The Godfather. And I said, yeah. I was in The Godfather. I'm like, really? He says, yes, I was one of the sons of the cafe
Oh,
owner. And sure enough, it's him,
wow.
45 years later.
Amazing.
And so the guy speaks fluent English. He loves telling stories to tourists who come in. He sat me down for an hour in his little store and told me stories about making the film and shooting that scene and meeting Pacino and auditioning for
Wow.
Coppola. And it was great.
That sounds awesome.
But here's the kicker, John. So he asked me, so what do you do? I said, well, I'm from New York. And he goes, oh, yeah, what do you do in New York? And I said, well, I'm an actor. And he goes, oh, my God, what have you seen? What have you done that I might have seen? And I said, well, I just recently finished filming this movie called Salt. It was directed by Philip Noyce and starred Angelina Jolie.
Right.
And he says, Angelina Jolie. He got so excited. He says, no, I must take your picture. Wait here. I go get my daughter. And so he runs next door and brings back his, 16-year-old daughter. He says, we want our picture taken with you. And I said, well, I'll be happy to apply. So
Awesome.
it was very funny. He was as excited about me as I was excited about him and his story. That was very funny.
Well, in the movie, that little village is like a climb, right? Is it above the beach or is it?
It is. It
Yeah.
is. It's funny because it's supposed to be a double for Corleone. So the actual name of the village, though, is Savoca. Corleone is sort of on the western part of Sicily. And this is way over in the eastern coast of Sicily. In the film, you would never guess that you could literally drive about 7 minutes and be at a beach.
No.
But the road from the beach to get up to where Savoca is this windy, curving corkscrew road to get up to the kind of the top of the bluff, I guess, where the village is.
Wow.
But it does seem like it's a dusty interior Sicilian town in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, while you're on the subject of The Godfather, could you touch on your idea of how New York is a character in the Godfather series?
Well, you look at it this way. I'm not so sure. Maybe I misspoke when I wrote that to you. It's not so much a character as it is. It's one of those great films that take place in New York City that could only be filmed in New York City. In other words, had they shot it anywhere else, it wouldn't have worked. It would have been completely diminished by having not filmed it in New York. And the hilarious thing about The Godfather, maybe some of your listeners know about this because there's so many Godfather fans out there now and they know all the stories. And there was that series called The Offer that was on Paramount Plus last year, which is actually quite a bit of fun about the making of The Godfather.
I hadn't watched that one.
Oh, it's fun. You should check it out. What's his name from Whiplash? And he was in Top Gun Maverick last year with Tom Cruise. His name is escaping right now. It'll come to me. But anyway, the funny thing about The Godfather is that when Coppola was hired by Paramount to direct it, they said to him, well, we don't want to we don't want to. The cost of filming in New York is too expensive, and the unions are a pain in the ass. And blah, 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 blah. It says, what about shooting it in Kansas City?
Oh God.
And Coppola and Mario Puzo, who wrote the novel it's based on, where it's like, you can't do that. I mean, it is the story is integrally, the right word?
Close enough.
Set in New York City. You can't not set that movie in New York. And the suits at Paramount, I don't think this included Robert Evans, who was running the studio at the time, but maybe the Gulf and Western brass, Charlie Bluedorn back here in New York. They said, and we don't want it to be a period movie. That costs too much too. So let's make it a contemporary film, which would have been a recipe for disaster.
Yes.
The irony of it is that they decide to, pay pay Mario Puzo, whatever, $80,000 for the rights to film the book. And then they say, well, we're not going to, this is a hot property. The novel is a huge bestseller at the time. This is 1970, I guess, 69, 70. But we're not going to allow it to suffer the death that the last major Hollywood mob film did, which was a movie, I believe it's called The Group with Kirk Douglas. And it's about the New York Mafia.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
And it came out like in 69, I think. Maybe it was released in 70. But it was a huge flop because it was just full of cliches, and it didn't land with audiences at all. And they really were saying that they wanted to go to great lengths to avoid The Godfather having the same fate. And yet, here they were starting to compromise that vision by telling Coppola, go look at Kansas City for locations, and let's talk about maybe making it a contemporary tale rather than set in the 1940s. And Coppola knew that was a disaster from the get-go. Fortunately, he actually did go to Kansas City to scout locations, knowing full well that he was never going to do it if they insisted that it be filmed there. He comes back and he makes his case to the Paramount people, the Gulf and Western people, saying, no, it has to be done in New York. It has to be a period film. Try and find a little bit more money in the budget in order to do this. But they wanted to compromise it every which way they possibly could. They didn't want Brando because he was kind of box office poison at the time. Nobody wanted Pacino. The only person that kind of believed in Pacino was Coppola. Wow. So Coppola had to fight for all of these things. And then he had to fight for the budget to finish the film by going to Sicily with a very pared down camera unit in order to shoot all the Sicilian stuff. So it was a huge struggle for him to get that movie made, but thank God he prevailed.
Yeah, I didn't know that story. That's amazing. The accountants,
Yeah. But that's a great example, going back to your question. It's a great example of a movie that you could never have done it anywhere but New York. The stuff that needed to be shot in New York had to be shot in New York. And Coppola and his art design production designer, terrifically talented guy named Dean Tavallaris, who also worked on The Godfather Part 2, made great use of what was still available in New York, in Manhattan and Staten Island, that could still pass for 1945 New York.
Okay, without having to build out at night and stuff, build the sets out on the street.
Right. A lot of the interiors were filmed at a studio up in Harlem on 127th Street, an old place called Filmways Studios, which was a film studio that went back to like the 1930s. But they filmed interiors up there, and a lot of exteriors were filmed all over Manhattan. The Corleone family compound was filmed out in Staten Island. But it's kind of fascinating how they are able to cheat stuff and make it look again like 1940s New York.
They did a great job. I got to see that when they reran it at theaters a couple of years ago. And it was better than, the first time I saw it was on television. I thought it was one of the greatest films ever made. And then I got to see it in a theater, and I was
Yeah.
like, this is so much better than I thought it was.
Right. No, it's amazing. And I'm one of the few people, maybe not the few people, but I'm a person who feels like part two is even better. I mean, the Little Italy stuff, the stuff where in De Niro's part of that story was filmed just a few blocks away from me down here on 6th Street in the East Village. And what they did is they took over a entire city block on 6th Street down here in the East Village for about a month.
So they could do the parade and everything in there.
Yeah, to mock it up to make it look like 1917 Little Italy. And it's just, I mean, what they were able to show on film in terms of the authenticity of that time period, it's just staggering. In fact, it worked so well that it inspired Sergio Leone to want to do the same thing. And he looked for a story to tell in which he could do the same thing that Coppola had done. In other words, recreating a specific time period in New York history. And what he came up with was Once Upon a Time in America.
Okay, that's another De Niro film, right?
Exactly. Yeah. About the Jewish mafia. You know what? I'm close to being my battery running out, but let me just plug in the cord if you give me 10 seconds here. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. We're like 47 minutes. I don't know if there's a time limit on this, or so if it cuts out, we'll go right back in if we're not finished.
All right, very good.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, getting back to your question about what films kind of act as another character in the story, and two movies came to mind that I think kind of fit that bill. And they both happen to be Scorsese films. One of them is Taxi Driver.
Of course.
I mean, it really does act like almost, you could argue that it acts like an antagonist to the Travis Bickle character, because it certainly becomes almost representation of things that he feels like he needs to fight against. He talks constantly in the film about, got to clean this city up. It's gotten to the point where I just can't take it anymore. So the city acts like another kind of abstract character to him. And the other one also is Scorsese, and it's 1985's After Hours with Griffin Dunn.
Oh, yeah, yes. Okay, yeah. Michelle Pfeiffer. Right?
Rosanna Arquette.
Rosanna Arquette, okay.
Yeah, where he plays a guy who works for, I think he's like an actuarial or something, or an accountant, and he works in a building up here near Madison Square Park here in Manhattan. And one night he goes into a diner and he meets Rosanna Arquette, who leaves him her address, and he decides, he wants to get some. So he makes the almost Homeric journey down to Soho, which at the time is not the Soho of, European tourists and, shishi high-end boutiques. Soho back in certainly the 70s and on through about the mid 80s when the movie was shot was kind of grungy and grimy and dirty and absolutely desolate at night. Okay. So the story winds up there, and it becomes about the Griffin Dunn character's, journey into hell, and then his attempt to get the hell out of hell.
That's another Coppola movie.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Back to the safety of, uptown Manhattan. But it's a very dark comedy, and it's really hilarious. But the city in that movie also acts as kind of a character that's pushing up against him and trying to undo him at every turn. Great movie.
Well, I was talking to my wife when we were getting ready to go on our trip about, and now I'm not going to be able to pull up the name. It's the Jack Lemmon, where he goes to the New York City for a job interview.
Is it the Out of Towners?
The Out of Towners, yes.
with
It's another one where
Sandy
the
Dennis.
city's is attacking him everywhere. As the sewer blows up on him, he gets robbed. The police
Right.
grab him.
I think there's one
Yeah,
scene where he's gets mugged by Sylvester Stallone in Central Park.
I
If
didn't
I'm
know
not
that.
mistaken, he gets chased all over Central Park, and yeah.
I wanted to loop back a little bit, and ask you just a couple of opinion questions. You had mentioned how great the Godfather 2 was, and I agree. I thought in a lot of ways when it was originally cut,
Mm.
it was as good or better than the first one. I guess the Academy Award bore that out too.
Yep.
But did you ever see the one where they cut it sequentially?
I did. It was on
I
television the first time it was on. I was such a geek, John, about film. So when it first was shown on TV, I think in the fall of 1977, I was there as a kid with my little tape recorder, and I would record movies that were my favorite movies. And so I recorded. I think that was broadcast over 4 nights,
okay.
where Coppola recut both The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2 so that it would unfold sequentially, chronologically. And he added outtakes.
Yeah, I did. To me, it didn't work as well as the two movies.
I agree.
With the flashbacks. But but that leads to the other thing. The third movie that's nearly universally hated.
Part 3.
Part 3 of The Godfather. Yeah, I didn't like it when I first saw it, but I watched it a couple more times, and then I'm like, oh my God, this is what Michael got because he never committed to his job as the Godfather. He was always working, get out of the job, and he never fully committed. And if you look at it that way, it's kind of a great ending to the trilogy. He was punished for not being the Godfather, being all in, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's interesting about about Part 2, where at the end of 1 he is ensconced
Right.
as the heir apparent to his father. So he's the Godfather at the end of Part 1. He's gone to the dark side.
Right. They all come in
at the beginning of Part 2. He's saying to his wife Diane Keaton in Part 2 and Part 1. He says to her, "I'm going to get out. I've had enough, and I'm going to leave the family business, and I'm just going to devote my life to you." And of course, he doesn't. There's an attempt on his life at the beginning of Part 2 that draws him probably back in. He does say at one point, soon after the assassination attempt, to the Duvall character who plays his consigliere, his lawyer, he says, "I'm going to turn the reins over to you. You're going to become the new Don. You're going to become the new Godfather. I've had it with it. And plus, I might be assassinated. So be ready to step into my shoes if that should happen." But it doesn't. And it goes, he keeps saying, I'm going to go out. And he keeps making decisions that draw him further and further into the downward spiral. So by the end of Part 2, he's basically killed everyone close to him. In effect, he's killed Kay, his wife, because of the divorce over the abortion that she has. He's left alone. He's killed his brother. He's killed his other enemies.
Brother-in-law.
Yeah, and it's a very poignant, moving tableau we have at the end of Part 2, where he's sitting there at Tahoe in the outdoors on his estate by himself, contemplating, one assumes, or one can assume, what he's done, maybe regretfully, who knows. But it's so powerful. It's just such an incredible ending to that part of the Godfather saga. The thing with Part 3, which I don't hate as much as a lot of people do, but I do think it's deeply flawed. I read the screenplay before it was released. I had gotten my hands on a screenplay, and I thought it was a terrific screenplay because there was all that sort of the machinations of the relationship with the Vatican. And I found that to be really fascinating. that aspect of the story really fascinating. And then, of course, it does have to go back to the formula of the first two Godfathers, where he gets double crossed by some of his enemies, and he's got to take them out. And that's basically what he does. But the twist here is, and maybe I shouldn't be a spoiler here, but the twist is that comes back to bite him in the ass at the end of part 3, which I think is actually a great way to do it. It's just that it is probably what killed it the most was it was horribly miscast.
Yeah.
If you know what I'm referring to.
I know exactly.
Because you've seen the film. And so had it been cast, had the movie proceeded with the original actor, I think it would have had a better outcome in terms of being a better movie. Yeah. The interesting thing about that film, John, is that the first couple of movies that I did were happened to be a couple of more than a couple, it was like 3 or 4 David Mamet films. The American playwright. He and William H. Macy happened to be my acting teachers while I was studying at New York University. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just the sheer luck of timing that they happened to be there teaching acting the 4 years that I was at NYU.
Wow.
And out of the class that they taught, I and my classmates went on to form a theater company here in New York called the Atlantic Theater Company, and we're still around. This is almost 40 years later. But
awesome.
Consequently, I was been able to work with Mamet a lot, and did several of his films, and I've done more than 24 of his plays over the years. Something that I'm very proud of, and that I will forever be grateful for. Being able to do such terrific work.
Yeah.
Play such incredibly vivid and complex characters. It's just been I feel my career's greatest accomplishment is being able to be involved with some of the works of David. So the first few films that I did, I actually happened to be working with the actor Joe Mantegna.
Okay.
He was an old Mamet friend from the Chicago days, And so Joe gets cast in Godfather Part 3, and I get a call from him one day, and he says, "Oh, well, why don't you come down to the set? We're filming here in Lower Manhattan. You can come hang out and watch this film for a bit." I was like, "Hell yeah!"
Yeah.
So they did the same. Coppola did the same thing that he did on Part 2, which was he blocked off a block of Elizabeth Street down here in the East Village in order to film for about 2 weeks part of the movie. It's the scene in Part 3 where Joe Mantegna's character gets assassinated by Andy Garcia.
Okay.
And so he invited me down, and I went and spent the day watching them film, and it was just thrilling beyond belief.
That's amazing.
Right. Watching, Coppola just was, a god to me.
Uh-huh.
And of course, Gordon Willis was there, his DP. And that was just, I remember watching them film, and there were these 2 guys that had been hired as bodyguards, I think, for Mantegna's character. And I overheard them talking, and they were just kind of like, they were in wonderment and amazement like I was. And they were saying to one another, "God, can you believe it? We're here making the sequel to The Godfather." I was like, "Yeah, lucky you guys."
No doubt.
It was really cool. It was very, very cool. Yeah.
That
it was a big deal. When you block off an entire street in New York City for weeks in order to film a movie, it's a big deal.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, Coppola, is he is he like in command, or is he just like letting the director of photography do their stuff and kind of everybody knows? It seemed
like it to me. Now I know he and Gordon Willis clashed on the first Godfather. That's the stories that I've heard. But they seem to be very much a team when I observed them that day of filming. And of course, they, clearly whatever whatever disagreements they had on the first Godfather, they
Yeah.
quickly mended fences because 2 years later they shot Godfather Part Two together. So,
Well, yeah, I just I've never been on a film set.
yeah.
I didn't go to film school, so I have to I'm trying to learn what directors do, what directors of photography do, what the assistant directors do.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody's job. I'm trying to always get it right in my mind, and when I have somebody that's been there, just ask. I wasn't trying to like dredge up a story about them fighting, but I was
Oh,
just
no, no, no.
curious.
Yeah,
Uh,
no. For me, the best, and I've worked with quite a few big name directors. I mean, from Mamet to Oliver Stone, Sidney Pollack, Ridley Scott,
oh,
Philip Noyce. I mean, some pretty big names. And the best ones, Sidney Pollack, yeah, the best ones, they know how to talk to actors. They're not just um, they're not just behind the camera film nerds.
gotcha.
They know how to draw out performances from their actors, and for me, that really is the province of the director. I mean, of course, the director has to have the vision. He's got to know, what lenses he wants to shoot and how to piece it all together. But I think the best ones also actually know how to direct the actors in such a way that they get amazing performances out of. I've recently, been catching up on some Betty Davis films that I had never seen. So last week I watched. I'd never seen Jezebel or
Okay.
The Little Foxes, which are sort of. She made them at the apogee of her
Mhm.
career. They both happen to be directed by William Wyler, and Wyler won three directing Oscars. Um, he was really known for getting fantastic performances out of his casts, and it really shows in these two films with Betty Davis. Betty Davis is just on top of her game, especially in Jezebel. I mean, she comes on in her first scene in Jezebel like she kind of burst out of a cannon, and she
Uh,
is just amazing. I mean, if you look at her career, she kind of went on to campier and campier performances and films, starting in the 50s and on through the 60s. But when she was on top of it back in the 30s and 40s, boy, I mean,
yeah.
so much to be learned from watching these great old actors and actresses. And I encourage any young actor or actress that is listening to your podcast or watching on YouTube to go and discover the classics, because you can learn so much, not just about acting, which if that's your métier, uh, but about film in general. And I think it's really important. It's really important, I think, for actors to know not just about acting, but I think about filmmaking, all aspects of filmmaking, and all aspects of playwriting as well, all aspects of theater. But they also, I think it's imperative that they take advantage of seeing what their, I want to say antecedents, but what their ancestors do.
Sure.
Every performer has an ancestor. You know what I mean? We're all part of the
Mhm.
continuum.
Yeah, I'm a
And
retired archaeologist, so I understand exactly what you're talking
okay,
about.
well,
Do
great,
that.
yeah,
Do that.
because we are just continuing that long line of succession of performers giving our gift, such as it is, to audiences, as our forebears have done, for millennia. And to be ignorant of what uh, what has been captured over the past 110, 115 years of cinema
Mhm.
is really doing yourself a disservice. If you don't know who Betty Davis is, find out,
Yes.
you know?
Okay.
And that goes for from the biggest stars that Hollywood put out to international stars to smaller films to the character actors and actresses that were just there. It's like if you go see a film like the two I just mentioned, Little Foxes and Jezebel, the character actors and actresses in those casts, it's like gold, you know.
Mhm.
because, back in the studio days, people were hired to a studio contract 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 years, maybe a decade even. And they went to work like almost every day. I was looking at, who was it today? I was looking at his credits on IMDb. Oh, yeah. This terrific character actor named Sig Ruman.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know this guy?
He was Schultz, wasn't he? Stalag 17.
Was he Schultz? I can't remember, but he was in, did you ever see that great Jack Benny comedy, To Be or Not to Be? Carol Lombard.
Yes. Uh-huh.
The movie takes place in I believe Warsaw before the war.
Yeah,
maybe it's during the war, and he plays a German officer. And To Be or Not to Be is a farce, right? It's comedy,
right?
And he plays this Commandant Erhardt, and the classic line of Sig Ruman's in that film is, "Oh, so they call me concentration camp Erhardt, do they?" And it's kind of an ongoing joke. It's very, very funny. And Ruman was a German immigrant, came to Hollywood, I think, at some point before the war. And he just blossomed and had an incredible career for the next 25 years after that. And in 1937 alone, John, he made 14 films.
It's incredible. It's like every once in a while I'll run into somebody like James Hong. He's not from that older time, but he's got over 325 credits.
I know, it's insane.
Does the guy ever?
Yeah. Some of it's just day work, small roles in films. Nonetheless, he was in demand. These people were in demand. God bless James Hong. He's incredible. He's my favorite movie.
Yeah. Which one?
Chinatown.
Chinatown?
Chinatown's my favorite movie. Yeah.
I like David Lopan and Big Trouble in Little China.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you have a favorite film or a favorite handful of films?
Well, my just depending on how cynical I'm feeling, it's Stalag 13 or A Bridge Too Far. So they're both military films, but very cynical.
Stalag 17.
Stalag 17. I don't know.
But I enjoy Stalag 17 too. I'm a big William Holden fan. Mm-hmm. But A Bridge Too Far, John, is my favorite war film.
Yes.
I saw it. I don't know if you saw it when it was first released. I saw it when I was like 14 years old, and I was blown away by it.
Just amazing.
Oh, it's amazing.
All the equipment and
right. And it's the real deal. I saw somebody posted on Twitter last week or 2 weeks ago the paratrooper drop scene, which, they filmed it in 1976. This is before CGI.
Right.
A big deal. I mean, it was one of the most expensive movies ever made. I think back in 1976, it had a budget of like $100 million.
They gathered up all those antique planes for the tow glider scenes and everything.
You watch this. You watch the sequence, and that one sequence alone in Bridge Too Far, where it's the Allied paratrooper drop over Holland for Operation Market Garden in World War II, which was turned out to be a fiasco for the Allies, but made a great film.
Sure did.
But that sequence, which goes on for maybe 5 minutes or so, I'm watching this thing, and I've seen the movie so many times, watching this thing and thinking, imagine, John, the planning and the work, the pre-production work that went into what they need to do in order to film this sequence.
Make it look,
a hiring of all those. Well, it wasn't extras. Apparently, they used army recruits from Holland or something like that to do the parachute drops. But planning on what shots they were going to need, where they were going to position the cameras on the ground, where they were going to position cameras in the plane. There's a few shots of guys jumping out who clearly were holding handheld cameras so they could get the in the air stuff. It's just staggering.
You get an idea of how rough it is, and and then how when it hit the ground, the impacts. I was telling my wife when we were driving through Normandy, we went to Omaha Beach and everything. Right. I was telling her about, we tried to make it to Saint-Mère-Église, but it was just couldn't be done. We didn't have enough time. Where they've still got the guy, they've got a dummy of a paratrooper
Right.
hanging from the steeple up there still.
Yeah, he looks a lot like Red Buttons, doesn't
Yeah, and I was telling her it's red buttons, and one day at breakfast she says, "Well, are you going to go to San Mariglis?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." She's, "So you're going to do your red buttons?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Huh?" And she's like, "Are you going to do red buttons?" Huh? And she had no idea what I was doing. I was
That's very
imitating the
funny.
movie.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
So,
well, I'm glad you both could get that reference to The Longest Day. But I actually did the whole Normandy thing about 10 years ago myself, and I did have it sounds like I had a few more days than you did, so I was able
yeah.
to get from some Mary all the way over to, oh, what was it? I guess it was Sword Beach. Is it Sword Beach where the Canadians landed?
So,
It's way over to the east.
yeah,
It's
Sword or Juno,
it's
one of those.
yeah, it was just west of the Pegasus Bridge.
Okay.
Um, I didn't get as far east as that, but I got to,
Uh,
I got to the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach. I went to Caen. I went to Utah Beach. I went to Sun Mary Glees, and I was there for about 5 days. And
yeah.
it was probably an incredible experience, of course. Pointe du Hoc, but it's
We took the coldest
probably,
walk.
yeah, but probably the closest thing one could get to stepping into a time machine and going back in
Right.
time, because there's so much that is still present there about the D-Day invasion.
Yeah, we had went to the Bayeux Tapestry.
Yeah.
Bayeux,
Bayou Tapestry. Yeah, yeah,
Bayeux,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
for like €2 more, you got a war museum, but it was a British war museum.
Hmm.
So we toured that and got to all the American stuff late.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it was interesting to see the whole British side of it, which I don't know that much about.
Right. Well, did you get a chance to walk down on the beach at Omaha Beach?
No, we drove down a dirt road where there
Uh-huh.
was a parking lot, and I'm like, I'm going to get the rental car struck, and turned around. Then when we went up and were on the Nazi bunkers.
Yeah.
You could see that led right to a parking lot to the beach, but we didn't get to do it.
Well, I spent a couple days down there. I went to the museum at the American Cemetery, and then
Mhm.
you can wander around the grounds themselves, which is absolutely hallowed ground. It's incredibly moving to see all the crosses and stars of David and everything. And then later that day, I went down to the beach and just decided to hang out on the beach. I actually went swimming in the
Oh,
English
nice.
Channel. This would have been like late July.
Yeah, because it was very cold when we were there
Yeah.
in May.
Oh, okay. But the water was warm, and the incredible thing to me about it was that here I was on probably, say, for some of the Pacific Islands during World War II, probably the bloodiest battle ever fought on a beach.
Right.
And it was a day that was gorgeous. The sun was out. Families were picnicking on the beach. Little kids were running around with kites. There were these groups of people that were doing like these sort of like almost like catamaran races. These kind of three-wheeled
Okay.
vehicles with sails on them.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what you call them.
Call
But
them
they were
desert
having,
sailors myself.
oh, okay, yeah, okay. But they were racing back and forth on the sand, by where the surf was coming in. It was, and you go, my God, imagine
Yeah.
these decades
then-
later that this is happening right here. Yeah.
So this one next year will be the 80th, I think,
That's right. Yeah.
and
Right.
that's going to probably be the last one with a lot of veterans left.
Yeah.
That's a big one anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like it was amazing. That was actually moved there. It was like that was an experience where I felt something like what they did here was important,
Mhm.
and it's amazing to be here and see. Hey, you're 17, 18, 19 years old. Wade through that water, get up that beach, get up that hill. I'm
Yeah.
a long way up here on this hill.
Yeah.
It's
We owe a
amazing.
lot to the men and women that fought that war, who participated in that particular invasion, not just Americans, of course, but our allies
Right.
as well. And you can't not, at least I feel, go past the anniversary of the D-Day invasion without acknowledging them in some way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jordan, this has been great. I have really enjoyed talking to you, and you've given a lot of great information that I'm sure everybody's going to love on the
Thanks. Well,
podcast.
it's fun to tell some of the stories that
Yeah.
I picked up over the years of being in this business.
Yeah.
It's been great fun. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's wonderful to have you. You can find out more about Jordan on imdb.com. Check out his movie Silence and Darkness 2019. He also has a website, jordanlage.com, and he's on Twitter at Jordan Lage. There'll be some boxes and circles around here. One box will have a recommendation for you, and the next box will have a playlist. The circles for subscribing so you can get notification.